Now, EU lawmakers have just approved the world's first legal framework on artificial intelligence.
AI Act
that would govern the use of artificial intelligence.
The Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act, 10% of your total annual revenue can be fined if you do not comply. The AI Act has a similar kind of risk factor. I would say don't make the mistakes that other startups have made, which is...
Welcome to a new episode of XR and AI Spotlight, the show where we give the stage to the founders and makers who are pushing the boundaries of XR and AI. My name is Gabriele Romagnoli, I'm your host, and I'm here today with Alexandra Magaard. Alex is a storyteller, strategist, policy wonk, and the former head of tech policy at Iconomy, a capacity builder organization for the European tech ecosystem. She is a good friend and a colleague, and I've seen her advise several founders from startups and scale up, from deep tech to ad tech, travel tech, and really helping them navigate the increasingly complex field of tech regulation. And of course, discover how many of these EU regulatory frameworks, like for example the Digital Market Act, aren't simply new compliance burden, but actually an opportunity for startups to enter in a fairer market. So it's a pleasure to have her here. And today, stay with us to learn what is the AI Act.
So it's the world's first regulation of artificial intelligence. It's kind of a horizontal approach to regulating AI. So it's not just going after the biggest tech companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook. It's really going to apply to all artificial intelligence developers, users.
The implication of the AI Act when it comes to generative AI.
They were nearly finished with legislating the AI Act when ChatGPT last year entered the world, changed the entire game. They added specific transparency requirements for generative AI. And that's actually what kind of held up the legislation for the past 6 months.
And ways in which the EU can keep supporting deep tech founders.
So regulating versus innovation, what can governments do? I think this also comes back to...
But before we get into it, I wanted to thank our sponsor Meshi, who made this episode possible. Meshi is a real powerhouse for generating 3D assets with AI. You can start with a simple text or image prompt and get high quality stylized model in just a minute. One feature that I personally love is the ability to create stylized textures for any mesh with or without UV, and since the release of Meshing 2.5, pro users can even edit only section of the generated textures with just a text prompt. Try it out, go to meshi.ai, start the 7 days trial, and after that, use the code XRAI20 to get 20% off your subscription. And now it's time to roll the title and welcome Alex under the spotlight. So Alex, it is great to have you here.
Thanks, Gab. It's great to be here.
So let's first start by explaining a little bit what is this AI Act and how does it approach the regulations of artificial intelligence?
Where to begin? So the AI Act is first and foremost the world's first regulation of artificial intelligence. That's the first most important thing to know. Second thing is that the EU has been working on the AI Act for the past 5 years. They were nearly finished with legislating the AI Act when ChatGPT last year entered the world, changed the entire game. So, which I know we'll get into later, of what happened, some of the politics, because I think you and your audience might be interested. But what is the AI Act? So it's the world's first regulation of artificial intelligence. And it's unlike other EU legislations or policies, it's kind of a horizontal approach to regulating AI. So it's not just going after the biggest tech companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook. It's really going to apply to all artificial intelligence developers, users. But what really kind of matters, the way it works, is that it has 4 different risk categories. And that's the key, I think, for every founder or every tech developer to know, is the level of artificial intelligence you're using high risk, unacceptable risk, or minimal risk, or limited risk. They have this pyramid of risk. So you have it with the 4 layers. And yeah, and that's basically the Artificial Intelligence Act. I mean, I think the main thing that, the EU is trying to do is get some transparency and establish a foundation for regulating artificial intelligence now and in the future, because there's so much about AI that we just can't predict.
So this is a good point. And just to kind of like high level break down those different risk levels, can you give us an example of a high risk applications and some others?
Totally. So I think maybe I'll start with the top, right? Which is unacceptable risk. And that would be predictive policing, let's say. That would be extreme levels or social scoring. I guess the example that many people know that's currently in use in China, right? So it's where it's kind of infringing, it's using extremely sensitive data, like one's gender, identity, religion, health data, whereas high risk, right below it, is maybe using some sensitive data categories, like gender, location, but there are much more stricter transparency regulations. So high risk is legal and allowed under the AI Act, unlike unacceptable risk. So I think maybe that's a good example. So you have like predictive policing, absolutely not, banned. You have, and social scoring, banned, unacceptable. High risk, you have maybe by the police in Paris when they have the upcoming Olympics, and they really do need to use artificial intelligence for tracking and safety. That would be a high risk application of AI, but again, that comes with greater transparency regulations that they need to report. Then you have limited risk, which I think applies to kind of the more general levels of technology that you know, Gab, like that maybe would include a lot of the AR startups.
So would, for example, a deep fake would be something that is in the area of medium risk or high risk?
Yeah, that's high risk.
That would be still high risk at deep fake then?
Yeah, I think, I'm actually not entirely sure, but I think it would depend on how the deep fake is used.
Right.
As in, is this someone impersonating Olaf Scholz, or is this some YouTube commentator? I think
yes, but you made a very good point that it's not necessarily just what the tech is, but how it's being used, right? And
exactly
what could be the potential impact of it. So, and when we look at another broad regulation, right, that struck everybody a few years ago, that is GDPR, right? So in that case, right, just to draw a quick parallelism, right, what are the differences in a way, and can what happened with GDPR help us predict the future of how this is going to evolve?
It's a tough question. I mean, I think any EU policymaker would hate me if I said that the AI Act was similar to GDPR, because one of their main goals of the last 5 years was, this is not GDPR 2.0. This is not a compliance burden that's going to hit all EU tech companies out of nowhere, and then basically just lead to a ton of tech companies moving to Ireland, the weakest enforcer of GDPR. So I think that's a kind of key difference to start off, is the AI Act should be less of a burden, should be easier to comply with for companies, should be more clear. I think that's why they have the 4 risk categories, because that should also make it easier for startups and for companies to comply. Although AI is still innovating and changing in real time. So I think that's kind of the first change. I know that the EU also is going to have AI office that's going to be kind of the centralized power and overseer of the AI Act. So I think that's intended to solve the problem of GDPR in the past, which is not having one central authority for companies to go to, and also so that they can't evade the regulation.
Correct. And that does make a lot of sense. So you have a body that is dedicated to assessing, and it's not like everything is spread over different responsibility. Now, when we look at this, there is a regulation, and it feels to the normal folks very abstract. And also for the people that are building products and they're building experiences or still untangible. So what is the actual impact of what can be on individuals and on startups who have artificial intelligence as part of their use? So for users that are using these products, or for the people that are building them, what's the impact?
The impact is transparency. The impact is you're going to, so it's kind of two things. Let's start with the data you're using to build and train your AI models. That you will have to list and you will have to report to your relevant regulator. So if you were in Brussels, you need to report to the Belgian member state, for instance, who then reports to the EU AI office. So you need to report the data that you're using to train your AI model. And I think what they're trying to really avoid, and with the data, it also needs to comply with the EU's Copyright Act. So I think what the EU is trying to avoid basically is startups, or what we've seen in the past, maybe not startups, but kind of scraping a ton of media organizations, authors, artists,
YouTube,
using all of their data without consent, or any kind of like notoriety, God forbid, even payment to the original content creators. So it's basically about just kind of giving the content creators some form of credit or transparency within the data for AI. And then it's also about the AI algorithm itself. And that is what they're trying to audit. So for the builders and let's say startups who will be building and using AI, they will probably need to have some sort of transparency with their algorithms and how they're being used. And then also with the data, what specific data characteristics are they using? Are they using any sensitive data characteristics, like one specific location that might involve where their house is, or where their religion is, or hospital, that kind of aspects.
Right. So this is for the people that are building these models in a way, and I think that is an important questions that arises, like, is this thing gonna be valid for everybody, right? Because the AI Act, it's a European regulation, right? But before starting venturing into that topic, because I think it's very important, there is another aspect that I wonder, and I know that this might not be your area of expertise, right? But maybe just sharing my thoughts, is the marking of this generative AI content. So does the AI Act in some way provides guideline on how to watermark what could be AI generated content, being an image, being a video? Is there anything in there regarding how to help user understand what is AI generated or not?
Yes. So that was actually why at the last minute they added specific transparency requirements for generative AI. And that's actually what kind of held up the legislation for the past 6 months, was how to kind of, what level of rigor do we need for the watermarks of generative AI content, like the deepfakes you mentioned. And then also the EU was just being slammed with lobbying by big tech companies, trying to water that down, or by the kind of smaller, medium European generative AI creators who said, hey guys, this is a fierce battle. every single continent is trying to win right now, and you want to regulate us? Yeah, so anyway, what does it mean for generative AI and what watermarks? I'm not sure on the specifics here, Gab, but I know that that is, I think it's going to include like every single image or video will need to have a watermark specifically on it, stating and clearly telling users this is generative AI. And I think this also goes back to transparency of where the data came from. Like this was created by X user relying on the Financial Times data set from 2023.
Interesting to see how that's going to be implemented, because every time I think about when we say watermarking, we imagine about a big, fat, semi-transparent mark that goes on an image, that goes on a video. But on the other hand, those are very easily cropped, right? I mean, you can easily remove that and say, oh, okay, this is the image. So I think that must be, and something that I'm looking actually into and trying to understand how this could happen at the code level, at the training level of the model, at the platform level. So it can, for example, like TikTok or whatever, or YouTube, recognize what is AI generated content and just mark it from a platform level. Because again, that could be something that then there is a little thing that is added by YouTube or whatever as AI generated, and not by the user that generated, that could easily correct or even remove that watermark with another AI tool. Let's be honest. So this is a bit the thing. But you mentioned a big point, and it's already this conversation about big tech. So and indeed.
Wait, before we get to that, I just want to say I think you bring up a great point also, and that will be interesting in the AR and MR field. Is how will they potentially watermark an image? I mean, we even know with subtitles how difficult that gets, how much that changed, will it get cropped? And I would be especially curious if I'm using the new Apple Vision Pro in 2 years or something, will there actually be like a real watermark or some sort of transparency I as a user can see? Who knows?
Yeah, that is the other point, because I mean, one thing is consuming content on a screen, right? It could be our phone or our monitor, and one thing is seeing AI generated content when you are in space as part of your own environment. I think that again, that becomes not just a technological challenge but also a design challenge, because again, when you are immersed, you don't want to see watermarks, or there must be a more elegant solution. And I think that is something that involves a body that puts everybody together, because that's the tricky part, from the people that learn, that build these models, the people that use them, and the platform that hosts the content.
And that's an exciting point. That I think that even design challenge is a very tangible opportunity, maybe from the AI Act, is what startups, what designers might emerge to meet that.
This is a good, exactly, because I mean, as we started this, it's like every time it feels like there is someone on top of you saying, hey, don't do this, don't do this. And there is hardly people that instead think of, okay, now this thing is different, it's new, it will evolve, it has a lifetime in order to be put in place. How can I grab this opportunity and create something that instead, let's say, is built on this? So absolutely.
Yeah, and we actually already work with one very cool US startup that's doing exactly this, trying to fit the niche. They're called Credo AI. And what they basically create is a kit for companies. So it's an AI system, ironically, that a tech company can integrate into their internal systems, and then it measures all of their data usage, data collection, and algorithms, and then can specifically flag for companies internally, like proactively saying this is very close to being a high risk algorithm. This is using a specific data category banned by the AI Act. So anyway, a bit in depth, but what I'm trying to say is there are already startups emerging to kind of fit this market niche. And hopefully we'll see even more, because I wouldn't really rely on the EU's AI office to come up with, as you put it, an elegant solution for this design challenge.
Yeah, no, indeed. I want to go back to that topic about the struggle, in a way, of regulating between innovating, right? So if I am a SME, right, maybe a medium-sized company, I'm driving innovation, I'm creating something new. So how do you think there is a risk that this AI Act might somehow impair the ability to compete with someone that maybe is not regulated by the AI Act, maybe in another region of the world?
I mean, yes and no. I think to answer this question, only time will tell, because the answer to this question is, how strongly will the AI Act be enforced? And how rigorous will the EU be in really holding tech companies to account? I mean, maybe in Germany, in specific regions, they will have a very strict regulator, as they have in the past with GDPR, and that might really hurt an SME based in that region. But I'm not entirely sure how quickly and how much teeth the AI Act will have. I hope it will have some teeth, but I really hope that they will only focus on kind of the tip of the iceberg, that unacceptable risk and that super high risk. And most SMEs wouldn't be classified as that. Unless they're using super dangerous, intrusive forms of data, I would really hope that this is an opportunity, actually, for the majority of EU startups. But to actually just get to another maybe interesting point of that question, Gab, I think that it also comes down to, so regulating versus innovation, what can governments do? I think this also comes back to funding and to investment streams. And I think that is actually the biggest challenge for EU startups right now, especially using AI, is if the majority of the capital is in the US, comes from American investors, and there's just simply less capital in the EU, and you're getting squeezed for chips, computing power, cloud infrastructure. How are you going to pay those upfront costs to even try and enter the market? So that's where I think that the state really does have a role to play in kind of supporting this generative AI race.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like, oh, there is the AI Act, we're going to be regulated. I mean, let's talk about the real thing here. It's not necessarily the regulation that might hit like a very small percentage of these company, because again, what is being regulated, it's high risk scenarios of utilization of this technology. How do we instead deal with what's the biggest challenge, being the funding and support for these startups, right?
Exactly.
Because at this point, I think what we are saying is, how does a company that is building a large language model in Europe gonna compete with OpenAI, for example? Like that's basically what we are saying. Now, based on your experience, right? And also from a founder perspective, actually, right? Not just regulation or people. So like, if you are a founder that is facing this right now, what advice do you give him based also on the company that you have worked on in the past?
I would say, don't make the mistakes that other startups have made, which is only engage at the last minute with policy and comply. I would say meet your local, not local, but meet your, if you're in Germany, meet, I'm forgetting who's in charge, I think the Bundesnetzagentur, but proactively meet them ahead of the AI Act to assess if you're even in the risk area for high risk, if there's any specific auditing compliance you need to do, I would say try and work proactively with the regulator to really understand the AI Act and make sure we don't have the same GDPR situation of kind of last minute companies scrambling to
Yeah, but
avoid a
let me ask
fine.
you a question, because let's say I'm a founder, right? Imagine I'm a founder, I'm super busy, there is a lot of stuff to do, right? I
Right.
need to get clients, I need to fundraise, I need to take care about the products, hire people.
Mhm.
Now, because that's the trade-off, right? There is the everyday founder's life, and there is like, oh, I need to talk with my
Mhm.
with who's the body that is taking care that could help me sort this out. Is there a return, or maybe can you help people understand what is the risk of not doing it? Because that could be also another reason to actually act early. So why do it? I just wanted to have a quick break to remind you that the recording of these episodes and many more great conversation with incredible experts are available on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Just head over to my profile or in the episode description below and pick the platform you prefer. And now let's get back to the show.
Because the political will is there. I mean, Thierry Breton from France, he is guns blazing, ready to enforce the AI Act. And these new fines carry sharp, these new regulations, excuse me, carry sharp fines. I mean, I'm not sure specifically with the AI Act, but I know that, with the Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act, 10% of your total annual revenue can be fined if you do not comply. And I would guess that the AI Act has a similar kind of risk factor. So why comply if you're a busy founder? I mean, many reasons. Why comply? First off, it might be a benefit for your company. We have a couple startups we've worked for that actually use a European compliance seal, not for regulators, but for investors, to say, hey, our data has been verified as GDPR compliant, and we are not only that, but a leading deep tech company. And I've seen how this has really helped them get even more investments or business partnerships. So I would say comply for your own business if it can be a competitive advantage. I would say comply because I think in addition to the EU, more and more countries are going to be following them and regulating. So it's only a matter of time before you have to. And then the third reason is the obvious one, which is you're a startup. It's already hard enough getting funding. You don't want to risk getting a fine, getting negative bad press, especially in today's tight funding landscape.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. I think that makes it very, very tangible. So that's very concrete in a sense. Good. So do it. Like, at least ask.
I mean, I wouldn't be a good policy person if I wasn't like, come on, guys, take this seriously.
No, you're right. No, absolutely. On the other hand, we moved a bit away from the one point that you brought up, being, hey, this is not the biggest challenge here. It's about funding for startup and support for this deep tech at this point, right? We're not, I think, at this just talking about AI startup, but deep tech startup in the EU. So totally. in that sense, instead, what's your take on that? I mean, again, as a founder, right? Mm-hmm. How can you try to get access maybe to more funding, or try to keep up while being in Europe and not compete necessarily, not necessarily needing to go look for funding overseas?
Well, I mean, the first message is please stay in Europe. I say this as an American who moved to Europe because I'm excited about European tech and I really care about the European values and regulations. So please stay here. Do not sell out to Singapore or to China. And what can you do? I mean, the first thing is, Gab, we've worked on this even together. The European Innovation Council, the EIC, has a new set of grants that are a great opportunity for startups. I think, what is it, 4 million, 6 million in potential grants, right? I think it's somewhere around that.
Not sure about, but it's per startup, right? So it's like
yeah, but it's a sizable amount of money, is what I'm trying to say. It's not just a drop in the bucket. So I would say the European Innovation Council grants. I would also say that there's a ton of great venture capital firms in the EU that are worth working with, engaging with. You might, I mean, Gab, you know more than me, I think, from this aspect, but I think because sometimes the venture capital firms in Europe have a smaller total amount of capital, that you might have to gain funding from more of these kind of independent VCs. But the support, the ecosystem, the advice they can give you, especially on the EU market, is totally worth it.
Yeah, I think that's also very much dependent on where is your market and where you plan to establish your own venture, right? I think that the moment that you go out, you are going to stay out. And that means also relocating your resources. So that is also an important decision that needs to be taken into account. Now, one thing I was curious, since you, as an American, indeed, that moved to Europe, what are some of the differences that you have seen with AI regulation? Because, of course, something of this form exists also in the US, I imagine, right? So are there some core differences?
Well, I mean, the EU legislates, and we have the AI Act, whereas in the US, we have a voluntary executive order from President Biden that simply offers guidelines. So that's the kind of main and first obvious difference between the EU and the US, is that the US is still much more hands-off, talking about guidelines. Even though President Biden is committed, there isn't really, Congress isn't passing any legislation anytime soon, especially with the election. So it's just more of a Wild West in the US. Whereas in the EU, they are passing regulation, the political will is there, the conversations are there. That's the first thing. I think the second big difference, I would say, is Europeans care about privacy. I mean, we care in the US, don't get me wrong, especially with the government, but I think that it goes deeper from what I've seen in the EU. This kind of like real value in your privacy, and it kind of, I think it motivates people to take the next step and really even work with smaller startups, let's say Proton, and use Proton mails, email, or VPN as an alternative to Gmail, even though you might face dark patterns, annoying pop-ups, because you're just that much more committed to privacy. And that's like kind of a key difference I see between EU consumers and US.
Right, that's also make a sense when from the user layer there is like the willingness to, and the need in this case for privacy, then is the moment that also policymakers, right, they are more willing to embrace certain regulation, because again, those are the voters, right? So you can also ride
Exactly.
that dynamics.
Exactly. But also it has to be said, like in the US, I think, and this is maybe the final difference, in the EU, you know, you guys don't have the class action lawsuit culture that we have. There's not, I think, the constant threat of they're going to sue me. Am I compliant with the law? Am I going to be handed a ton of legal fees tomorrow, the day after? You do have that threat in the US, especially I think in a few select states like California and New York that do have more technology regulations. So that would be maybe another difference.
So because the other point is, let's say that some of these corporates like Microsoft or OpenAI, I mean, OpenAI is not necessarily a corporate, but let's imagine one of these biggest players, right, that operate globally. So how will they operate, right? Between I have some rules or some regulations that are in recommendation in the US, and I have other instead that are enforced in Europe. How do you expect that do you expect them to behave?
I expect them to maybe threaten at first and say, we're going to have a different algorithm, we're going to have a different model, we're going to have a different product for the EU than the US, and to probably threaten the EU with that. I mean, we're seeing that right now with the Digital Markets Act, actually, with Facebook saying, hey, you want us to, what is it? I think you want us to like not track users as much. Okay, sure, but we're going to make it so that every user in the EU faces the question of, do I use an ad-free version of Facebook, but pay €5 a month? Or do I use where I am giving them all of my data, but a free version of Facebook? So we might see that game happening of two different versions of the product within the EU and the US. But what I think will probably happen more is that these big tech companies like OpenAI will have to follow the EU regulation for the entire world, because they will have so much data fed, because they need data right now. That's what's kind of the competitive advantage, among other things, for their generative AI model, is how valuable is the data, how rich is it, how rich are their algorithms, and they're going to need the data from the EU, which ultimately will have a ripple effect of them having to comply worldwide.
That's going to be tough. I mean, I think there is going to be a lot of, I mean, with regards to kind of like timelines or next step, right? So this is almost in place, right? When do you think we can expect to this AI office to be put in place, this and companies to start acting on these guidelines?
Well, the EU says by the end of the year, by the end of 2024.
I hear some sarcasm. I hear some sarcasm.
Well, I'm a bit salty because I've been following, the Digital Markets Act, as you know, Gab, for 3 years. And it came into place March 6th. A couple companies brazenly didn't comply, Apple. And now the EU is saying, okay, we're gonna open a 12-month investigation into your non-compliance. So really, Apple will face no scrutiny or no real consequences until next year. Anyway, that's why I'm a little bit skeptical about when is this getting real. But
I think though that there is another important thing, and is indeed, as we started this conversation, being the risk. Yeah. So the perceived risk of something like this, the moment that there is public security at risk, and something that indeed, like social scoring, for which again we in Europe feel very strongly about it, that is also like leads to a different kind of conversation and urgency and measure and consequently timelines. I'm not saying that this is going to be, and hopefully we don't need something bad to happen for things to happen. But I think that is also another part of the conversation element that could make things differently. I'm not saying better or worse, but just could have an impact, and is this perceived level of risk that the technology has.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm excited to see the Olympics this summer in Paris. I'm excited, of course, as just an everyday person to watch, but I'm also excited as a tech policy wonk to see what happens this summer. because I know that the French government lobbied very strongly to get some exemptions for them processing specific biometric data in order to ensure security during the Olympics and kind of to safeguard against any terrorist threats, safety threats. But I'm genuinely interested if they cross the line or if there's any protests or discourse, because that might be a nice kind of temperature gauge for where this is going.
So, Alex, I think we went from the regulation to the companies to the world perspective on this. I was curious of what's your personal instead, let's say, journey. I mean, moving from the US to Europe in Germany, supporting startups, now working at Iconomy, indeed leading the tech policy practice. What's next also for you?
Yeah, well, I've been in Germany for 5 years, 2 years after Trump, doing a master's in policy here, focused on AI ethics, to now working at Iconomy and tech policy. And I'm actually moving back to the States because I feel like, it's time to start implementing exactly what I just said. If I think these regulations are going to have ripple effects on American companies worldwide. And I think it's time, at least for me personally and for the field, to kind of go back to the States and try and start implementing there. So what does that mean? I'm moving back to the States and probably going to start working for a tech company, helping them comply with the AI Act, but also just helping them measure the risk of AI, of their field, of their industry in general. So yeah, stay tuned.
There is one thing I learned also is that there is this indeed impression of complying, but it's not just that. It's also the extra value that the organization, the company, the founder gets in being positioned and well framed on a stage that is not just made of your peers or your users or your clients. It is a broader stage, right, that includes other stakeholders. And there are fields that go way beyond. I mean, if we think about energy, right, that is another very complicated area where there is a lot of layers. And so the point is that tech policy, what I've learned, goes way beyond the just regulation of laws, but it's really about how do you position a certain vision of the company and the product, and how does that fits within society and within the people that somehow made that society, either the policymakers, the final users. So I think this is a broader picture that is not just, we have a bunch of check mark to fulfill. I think it goes way beyond and provides value way beyond that. So that is
exactly. I mean, that's something I saw, just working with this pretty large unicorn German scale-up last year, is that at a certain point, these kind of questions we were forcing the founder to answer about tech policy, about where they are in their vertical, where their company is, where they want to be, how they'll use generative AI for the next 2 years of funding. And we wound up working directly with their product team and with their marketing team, because these exact questions were directly integrated into their future of as a company. Yeah.
And I think that is 100% true. So that's as a statement of the importance and the strategic value of looking beyond. Because when you start looking outside, that's the moment that the outside might have direct impact on what you build, how you build it, and how you communicate it. So absolutely. So Alex, look, I'm sure we will stay in touch. I wish you absolutely the best of luck. And I wanted to thank you really for being with us today. And in general, try to unpack this complexity and position it not just as a comply, but as an opportunity for companies, founders, and users to get a more transparent environment around AI. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you, Gab. And thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Thank you very much for listening in. If you enjoyed the conversation, remember to head to YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts for more insightful conversation revolving around XR and AI. And if you like the show, please leave a rating on Spotify. It really helps me keep doing this and shine the spotlights on the latest and greatest founders and creative in XR and AI. Till next time.